Oh, YouTube, this is Umozo3. In the previous video in lesson 0, the only thing that we did was I basically described how I was going to be creating a compilation, a set of YouTube videos that will demonstrate my knowledge and my advice for writing Python code. And one of the things I mentioned is that I already do have a playlist for Java programming. And so if you were inclined enough, you could already go spend about 12 hours learning Java programming. I think it would be about that much content, 12 to 14 hours. Because what I've done is I've basically done about 45 20-minute long videos where I basically demonstrate the Java fundamentals, but I figured the more the merrier. And I not only know Java, I also know Python. And so the more programming languages that you can equip yourself, the merrier, and you're going to be better suited to support different types of industry applications within software engineering as you pick up more languages. And one of the things we said in the previous video is that it's a lot easier to go from your first language to your second than it is to start your first. And that's because there are parallels, and there are going to be paradigms in computer programming that are common to all languages. Creating a variable that shows up, that's not a Python or Java thing, that's a computer programming thing. A function, that's not a Python thing, it's a programming thing. So you're going to see parallels, but then there are also unique and common things that are specific to particular languages. And that's usually when we're talking about syntax. Do we need to end a line with a semicolon? Do we need to have parentheses? Are we allowed to have space in between these two brackets? And so what we're going to be doing is studying the syntax of Python, and we're going to build up increasingly interesting programs that take advantage of the mechanics of Python and the syntax of it so that you can become familiar and comfortable with writing increasingly interesting programs. So in the last video, the only thing we did was we said that PyCharm is an integrated development environment that can be used to write Python code. And we said it's similar to like in Java, where we need this software integrated development environment called BlueJ. But now you can see down here on the bottom right of my screen, you should be able to see an icon on your desktop or wherever you saved it called PyCharm. So hopefully you've had a chance to download this integrated development environment. If you haven't done this already, you didn't make it to lesson 0, just go ahead and Google download PyCharm or something. It's a link from JetBrains, and then you can go ahead and pick your operating system. And then you're going to be looking at the community version rather than the professional, because the community is the free version, and it's going to be probably more than enough for the purpose of these videos. So now that we have PyCharm, we're 2.5 minutes in. So I'm going to make these videos about 20 minutes long going forward. And what we're going to do is, hopefully if you've opened PyCharm, you go ahead and see this window. And if you don't, you should be able to see some drop-down menus on the top left, and one of them will just say file, and you should have an option to create a new project. So if you don't see this window, if you don't see this button here on new project, you could just go ahead and go up to file and press new project. So let me show you what happens when we do that. What it's going to ask you for, it's going to prompt you to basically type in a couple of things. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a location on your computer where you save your Python files. And as you create projects, you're going to want to do it in an organized way, and you're going to want to remember where things are located. So what I would do is I would be looking at, any of these folders that I had created. So basically what I did in February of this past year is I created a PyCharm projects folder, and you can just save all your Python projects, your PyCharm projects into a particular folder on your desktop. You just want to basically have an organized place where this is going to be, and you just want to basically be able to establish that. So if I go ahead and go to my folder from February and I save it in this PyCharm projects folder, now what we're going to do, and that's going to be the location of where this new project shows up, right? PyCharm projects is a directory, it's a folder. And then so the project is going to appear in that directory, and you just need to specify where on your laptop, where on your computer it's going to be located. And we will have, it's a new environment using the virtual environment, so make sure that this radio button is selected rather than the other one. And you just need to basically have a virtual environment. So you need to create a virtual environment, and it really needs to be in the same place as where your project is going to be saved. So you can see we're in this PyCharm projects repository. Your virtual environment should probably be going into your PyCharm projects repository. And then the base interpreter, so this is the interpreter. So this is basically the logic, so this basically makes all the Python commands work. And then what we will do is we will select this box that says create a main.py welcome script. Okay, so this is basically, we talk about file extensions. And so you've already heard of a .txt file or something like that, essentially, where we are basically, that's a text file. You've heard of a .doc, which is a doc file. You've heard of a .ppt, which is a PowerPoint file. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a Python file, and it's going to be executable, which means that Python is going to know what to do with any words or letters that appear in that file. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and press create. So what you're going to do is, now that all this stuff is configured, as long as you've checked this box that says create a main.py welcome script, you're going to go ahead and press create down here. And you can just go ahead and create the project. So if it asks you whether you want to open it or create it, you can just go ahead and create it from existing sources. And sometimes this does take a minute. So it's going to create the virtual environment. In my experience, that can take a good few minutes. So what I'm going to do is just explain that we are going to basically be building from the ground up. So in each video, it's going to be cumulative. So you wouldn't want to play lesson 12 before you play lesson 10, before you play lesson 1. And so hopefully you're going to do this cumulative, because you can't print statements and you can't do a while loop or for loop in Python until you know how to print statements. Okay. You can't usually do a lot of functions in object-oriented programming until you know how to do loops and lists. So everything is cumulative, and we're going to be using this virtual environment to build up increasingly complex and interesting programs, because the goal is going to be able to use basically everything that Python provides us. Basically 100% of the functionality that Python provides, we want to expose it and explore it and use it in our programs, because that's what's basically going to make us make our programs the most robust. It's going to make us the strongest software engineers. So I think this virtual environment is about to load here, and you're going to see some things appear. And what it does is it's going to give you a sample Python script. And so you can see the directories, and you can see a little bit of navigation stuff on the left-hand side, right? Remember that we had a repository, we had a folder which I had already created on my desktop called PyCharm projects. And I recommend that if you didn't already have an organized folder or repository where you're going to be saving these projects, then you go ahead and do that before too long, because we're just going to be creating, we might have more than one Python file as we're doing these tutorials. So if we're going to have 12 or 18 Python files, you're going to want to be able to access them and know where they're located. So we're 7 minutes in, let's go ahead and write some Python code. So what we're going to do, you can already see some standard code here, and we're going to be starting from scratch, just like we did for Java. Okay, so instead of trying to interpret what this means and modifying it, let's just start completely from scratch. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is you can actually go ahead and delete all of this code, and we're going to figure out how to print a statement. So in Python, in order to print a statement, what you need to do is you need to say print. It's going to be the word print, just as you would spell P-R-I-N-T. And then you're going to have parentheses. And so what print is, it's called a function. So basically a function is like a command in Python. So it's going to basically execute a script. Python knows what to do if you say print and then a particular word or string, as we call it, that you want to print. So the first program, common, what's kind of classic here is that your first computer program that you write in a language, you would write something like print of hello world. Okay, so what this does is it calls a function called print. And Python knows what that function is. It's like built in, it's intrinsic to the Python language, okay? And you can actually, if you hover over, what I'll tell you about in this integrated development environment is that if you hover over a particular command, if you hover over like a significant word, it tells you tons and tons of information. And we're going to be studying this documentation, figuring out what all these words mean. So you might see a lot of things that you don't really know what means, right? Like the end and the file and the flush, you don't have to worry about all those. But it gives you a description. So it just says prints the values to a stream. Okay, so basically the stream is going to be the console output that we see. And so that's a little bit more information, or I guess details, than I think we need for this purpose. But now this is a Python program. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and say run here on the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to run main, okay? Because right now main.py, that's the name of the file, that's the name of the Python file in our PyCharm projects folder. So now what you do is if you go ahead and run the main method, let's kind of see what output that we get. And indeed, on the bottom, you get this console. This console output is going to appear on the bottom automatically, and it's going to say hello world. And so this was the output of the code. What did it do? It went through this directory, right? It activated the virtual environment, and then it went ahead into the PyCharm projects directory, which was within the umils03 directory. And then within the PyCharm projects directory, it ran this Python file called main.py, okay? And so that's how you print a statement. You say print, and then you're going to have quotations. And then for here, it would be a double quote. it turns out that it'll actually work for single quote as well, but you have to be consistent. So we're going to be explaining exactly what the mechanism is for that. But you could also do this with single quotes. So you could say, it's a great day for programming. I just want to modify what string we had previously, just so that we can make sure that this is going to work as intended. So what I'm going to be teaching you about is these escape sequences. But basically, if you say it's, this apostrophe here after the T, basically with this single quote, it thinks that you're ending the words that you're trying to print. So we're going to explain how to deal with that. But let's just do it without let's do it without that apostrophe on it's for now. I'm going to be explaining how to deal with that. But you're just going to say hello world and then it's, ITS, a great day for programming, just to make sure that we can also have single quote strings. We can also put words in single quotes. So now we can go ahead and run the main method, and it goes ahead and prints that console output instead. So we just demonstrated the use of the print function and the fact that if you want to print a string, which is basically just a collection of words, if you want to print like letters or words or a paragraph or a sentence, you can either put it in double quotes or single quotes. So that's printing statements. And then if you wanted to go ahead and stack them, if you want to go ahead and print two statements, so, you know, burgers are my favorite food, right? And then you can have as many as you want. So what's the capital, you know, and here we're going to be careful with the apostrophe again, but we would say, what is the capital? Is it OL or AL? Capital of Pennsylvania or something like that. Okay, so now you can go ahead and run this code and we can take a look at what we would get here. So hopefully you can expect that we're going to get the console output down here. It says, hello world, it's a great day for programming. Burgers are my favorite food. What is the capital of Pennsylvania? As we create more complicated computer programs, it's going to be helpful to have something called comments. And so what we do is comments are intended to help the user understand the program better. So they're not for the Python interpreter. Python's not going to read the comment and say, what do I do with this? It's between you and me. So it's between the software engineers to say, this is what the line of code does. So I'm going to give you a very simple example. So we're going to say something like print Tuesday is before Wednesday, okay? And so what you could do is you would have a comment that basically starts with a hashtag. So you're going to have an octothorpe there, you know, a pound sign, whatever you want to call it. And then what you would do is you would basically say prints a statement, okay? And so what this line of code does is it's a comment attached on to your print statement. So now if you go ahead and run the main method, it won't say prints a statement, it'll just say print of Tuesdays before Wednesday. And then that will help the programmer understand, oh, I understand what that line of code does. It prints a statement. You could also have comments be on their own lines. You can say the following lines of code will demonstrate that we can put statements into single or double quotes, right? And that's an example of a comment here, okay? And it's underlining this, so it says inline comment should start with hashtag, okay? So that's essentially what we have going on here. So this is basically an example. What we're going to be explaining is something called Python enhancement proposals, so PEP. And basically in computer programming, there's a distinction to be made between the rules that you need to follow and the norms that you should follow. So basically the reason why this line is underlined is because we say, if you want to have good etiquette, basically a comment should start with a hashtag and then a space. And so this is totally optional. This wouldn't create any issues for you if you try to run this code. It wouldn't you know, fail to compile. You can still run this and it's still going to say Tuesdays before Wednesday, and there's no issue with these two comments. But it's just saying that for the purposes of good etiquette, for it's saying, oh, what we typically see in computer code is to have a space in between the hashtag and the first letter of the comment, right? And then it doesn't really have any issue with that anymore. And then here you get another PEP 8. So what you're going to do, what I was saying is that if you scroll over function names, it can give you basically descriptions of those methods, right? So we saw a description of print. And then if you scroll over any of these sort of gray areas where it's sort of gray, underlined in gray, that's basically a PEP 8. So if it says PEP 8 and it just kind of has that soft gray underlining, that's basically a suggestion. So it says, well, maybe this would be a little bit cleaner if you put at least 2 spaces before the inline comment. So then if we make 2 spaces there, the warning goes away and there's no issue with that. And this is really clean code, right? So you can see that this command came in pink, and then this thing that we were printing comes in green, and then comments come in gray. So hopefully you're getting familiar with not just printing statements, but also how to make comments and why they might be helpful for the execution of code. We still have 5 minutes left, so we can talk about some basic arithmetic expressions. Python is able to do some math for us. So Python is capable of adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and then also finding the remainder when one number is divided by another number. So let's go ahead and see some of that stuff in action. What we're going to do is we're going to say print 45 plus 23. And then if we go ahead and run this code, instead of printing 45 plus 23, since we didn't put any quotations around this arithmetic expression, Python knows how to evaluate that as a mathematical expression. So it says, well, the programmer wants me to tell them what 45 plus 23 is, and indeed that's why we get 68 on the console. So that's an example of a basic arithmetic expression. It's printing the result of a mathematical command, okay? And the same thing can happen for subtraction, so it can handle negative numbers, no problem. So we would expect 8 minus 22 to give us negative 14, and of course the first print statement is still there, so we still have the 68. What we can do, one difference to make between Java and Python is if you go back into the Java program, the Java curriculum, one of the things we said is that in Java, an integer divided by another integer is an integer. So if you remember, if you go back to the Java videos, or if you haven't seen it before, what I'll tell you for the first time is that if you try printing 3 divided by 6, what it would do is it would tell you the number of full groups of 6 and the number 3. So what Java would do is it will say, oh, 6 doesn't go into 3, so there's 0 full groups, right? It's like you have 3 cars and 6 people to share the cars. So how many cars does each person get? 0. There's not enough cars to go around. Okay, if you had 8 cars, each person would get 1. That's the type of integer division that Java does. But Python will actually evaluate the division as we would expect it to be evaluated mathematically. So if we say print of 3 over 4, Python will actually evaluate that decimal expression. So it'll give us the 0.75. So that's a difference. We're already starting to see differences between Java and Python, is that Java would have told you 0 because 4 doesn't go into 3, but Python says 3 over 4, that's equivalent mathematically, numerically, to 0.75. So that's why it gives us the decimal representation of that result. Okay, and then what we can do is we can also take a look at the differences between integers and floating point numbers. So then what you go ahead and do is what you'll realize is if you go ahead and say, even if you had a perfect division in Python, so even if you had 100 divided by 10, and we know there's 10 exactly perfectly full groups of 10 in the number 100, but now if you go ahead and run the main method, what you're going to get is you're going to get a floating point number. So what we can do is we can say Python always returns a double, we'll say a floating point number when division is involved. Okay, so if you have a simple division like this, what it's going to do is it's always just going to give you the 0.0. Okay, that's always happens. That's another difference between here and Java, is that Java just does the integer division. So it would say 100 divided by 10, that's 10. But Python says 100 divided by 10, that is exactly 10.0. So hopefully you understand the difference there. I'm realizing we're running out of time, so we're going to see more arithmetic expressions in the next video, and we'll be reviewing the ones that we saw here. But you can also have basically what we're going to be talking about is implicit casting. So there's different data types in Python, but basically what Python is going to do is if you're dealing with both an integer and a floating point number, so both an integer and a decimal number in the same expression, the decimal number is going to be preferred over the integer. So the integer is actually going to be automatically converted behind the scenes to a floating point number. So let me show you what I mean by that. If you say print of 5 plus 2.0, we know that 2.0 is basically 2, right? So 5 plus 2.0 mathematically, we would just say that's like 7. But then if you go ahead and run the main method, it prints 7.0. And that's because you're trying to basically combine 2 slightly different data types. You have a 5, an integer, which you're trying to combine or operate with a floating point number. And Python says those are 2 different types, but I know that the integer can take a floating point form. So if what happens is, if I go ahead and convert the 5 behind the scenes to a 5.0, then I know how to add 2 floating point numbers. So then I would say 5.0 plus 2.0. Now that we're in the decimal universe, we would say that that's 7.0. So hopefully that just gives you a basic introduction to printing statements and why comments are helpful, how to get started with this stuff. And we'll be talking more about arithmetic expressions in the next video. So from UMills03, thanks for watching and please subscribe.